jump into the class with a little introduction of me. So my name is Morgan and I'm a leather worker, and I've been working in leather for more than 10 years. Growing up, my mother taught me how to spin, weave, sew, embroider. My dad let me play with his tools and bits of wood, so it is no surprise that I would end up hooked on crafting and creating. I was raised out in Pittwater, which is on the edge of a national park. Beautiful area, but a little bit out of the way, so shopping for supplies was a bit of a challenge. I think this taught me several things. Firstly, an appreciation for the Australian bush, which is a reoccurring theme in my work, but also to plan projects really well in minute detail, to make do with whatever was to hand, and also to hoard pretty much everything. At uni, a friend dragged me into the Medieval Society by asking me to do some calligraphy for them. And that was it. There was this community that was really friendly and welcoming, and they would teach you all of these arts, crafts, music, costuming. I was hooked. That's where I started experimenting with leather. And then one day I looked around and suddenly I had 6 tons of leather, quite literally. So after 2 uni degrees and 8 years in a science lab, I left that career path and started making leather goods, teaching and demonstrating leatherwork full time. And I still feel like I barely scratched the surface of what you can learn and what you can make. Okay, so you want to use leather. So the definition of leather is the flexible, durable material obtained by tanning or chemical treatment of animal skins and hides to prevent decay. If it can be skinned, it can be turned into leather. So I've got a few examples here. I've got toad, fish, eel, snake, lizard, down here is stingray, crocodile, and this one's a bit unusual. This is ostrich lake. So exotic leathers aside, 90% of the leather you see will be bovine. Next most common will be pig, goat, and sheep. There are also many methods of preserving leather. Again, the majority you see will be chrome tanned, that's preserved with chromium salts. Following this, vegetable tanned using plant tannins, oil tanned, and alum tanned, or a combination of these. So all of the tanning methods produce different properties in the leather, making them more or less suited for various uses. After the tanning method, you have how the leather is treated. So how the surface is prepared. It might be cut down to a different thickness, have the surface sanded, clean it up and remove scars, stamped with a grain pattern, or have the surface removed altogether. It might be stuffed with oil or wax, dyed, covered with a layer of acrylic paint. There's just so much variation in leather types, almost as much as there are in cloth. So when you are buying leather, if you're just looking to sew something in a lightweight leather, make a bag, a cushion, or add some applique to a quilt, chrome tanned leather is probably the cheapest, easiest option. It's also the widest range of bright colours and textures. Vegetable tanned leather is slower and more expensive to make, and it's seen more in higher quality leather goods, high-end leather goods like saddles, equestrian gear, for a few reasons. When it's unfinished, it can be shaped, stamped, and moulded with water, and then dried into a range of hardnesses. Depending on variations in the tanning process, it can be quite thick, up to 2 centimeters thick, and quite stiff, but it also develops a lovely patina over time as the surface oxidizes. Leather really has a similar material structure to early plastics like bakelite, a network of fibres with a glue of compounds between them. Chrome tanned leather has the same fibre network as vegetable tanned leather, but the chemicals deposited in it during the tanning process are a bit different and result in a much looser, softer structure in general. So can you see why this would make chrome tan a little bit easier for you to sew? When you're sewing cloth, you are pushing apart with your needle the weft and weave of threads. Whereas in leather, instead of threads, you have this whole network of interconnected fibre, more like a felt to push apart, which is a bit harder. And then they're glued together as well. So that's why tools to make holes in leather, such as sewing needles, awls, and stitching chisels, usually have cutting blades on a triangular or diamond cross section. So here's a glover's needle used for sewing delicate pieces of leather or furs together, and a leather sewing machine needle intended for about 5 to 10 millimeter thickness of leather, a sewing awl, and a stitching chisel. So note the little cheat with this last one, punching multiple holes at once, which saves you a bit of time and effort. If you see cylindrical leather sewing needles, they're generally blunt and they are intended just to pull the thread through on already cut hides. Much, much, much easier on your fingers, and really you can use whatever you have to hand to punch those holes and save your fingers a bit of effort. I have been seen hammering nails, wielding a drill, or using screws just to make holes in a pinch. The other difficulty you can run into while sewing leather is the sheer bulk of it. You can't just fold it around a corner for a smooth seam. That's why you plan your projects really well, and when necessary, you thin the leather over the seams and over the edges to reduce that bulk as much as possible. But to keep it strong enough, we try to preserve the top of the leather, which is the strongest part, and remove the bulk from the underside, the rough side of the leather. Threads for sewing leather come in a wide range of materials and sizes. So we have natural fibres like cotton and linen, over to polyester, rayon, and bonded nylon. The thickness of the thread is proportional to the weight and thickness of the material in use, and also how much wear and stress is going to be placed on the seam. So for thicker threads, we'll see both twisted and braided threads, and you can see they almost look like twine. When you've decided on your needle and thread, here's how you get started. I've got one of our card wallets here, 4 layers of 1.5mm veg tan, all decorated and ready to go. So threading the needle, make sure your needle diameter is thicker than your thread diameter. It makes pulling through much easier. So thread through the eye, just a little tail, push the needle through the thread, pull the tail, pull through to lock it in place. Now, different from most sewing stitches, we actually thread the needle on both ends, and you'll see why in just a moment. So optionally, I am using a stitching pony, a clamp to hold this all in place. As you can see, one of the problems with leather is you can't pin everything in place. Pins would leave permanent marks. You can use a clamp, you can use glue, or my favorite, double-sided tape. but we thread the needle through the first hole to the center of the thread, one needle on each side. And because this corner here is going to be under a lot of pressure, lots of cards pulling in and out, we're going to add an extra stitch to lock it in place. So right needle through the second hole, back through the first hole, and back to the original position. Just a little loop, an extra thickness of thread there to reinforce the corner. Now to start stitching, we're doing a basic saddler stitch, very simple once you get your hands around 2 needles. So right needle through right side, pull through, left needle through left side, and pull through. You can see the threads alternate sides, and you can think of it like a double running stitch. But because we place each stitch with the threads on both sides at the same time, the friction of the threads moving counter to each other provides more strength, especially if we're using a wax thread. You can cut every third stitch on this and it would still hold together. If you compare this to a lock stitch done on a sewing machine where one broken stitch, one broken thread, and the whole thing starts to unravel. It's also very easy to make the stitch more secure. So by adding at, say, every 6 stitches or at stress points like this corner here, a knot. We just looped the other needle around, push it through as normal, and that has created a knot. Consumes a lot of thread, but it is very useful and important for heavy work. get to the end, how do we finish this seam? The simplest method is just to reverse direction, sewing back over our original stitches for about 3 to 4 stitches. I would use the same method if I ran out of thread. Just reverse the stitches and then start again with a fresh piece of thread, just as we did at the beginning of the piece. After that, we can trim this end off nice and close to the surface here, and that's very secure. If you're working on the inside of a piece, you could knot the threads together, but it gets a bit bulky with the thicker threads. How can we make this look even neater? So we're going to take a hammer, a spoon, something smooth, and then just tap it gently over the stitches, pressing them down, make them sit nice and flat. Pushing that wax together into every little gap. And done. So where can you buy leather? There are several specialist leather stores and tanneries still in Australia. Because of the rarity, most have extensive online sales platforms, and most will have leather scraps and offcuts to hand, which are a great place to start. The commercial stores will certainly be happy to help you browse and find a leather that is suitable for your needs. So lastly, a little summary. If you would like to start sewing leather, pre-punch your holes to save your fingers, wax your threads, and choose soft, thin, suede chrome-tanned leathers that are easy to work with without heavy specialist tools. Hope you learned something.